I know. Everybody wants to know how to physically do something. I have so many people come up and say, "I don't know how to paint." And they're always asking me, what brushes should I use, and what kind of canvas or board or paper? How should I approach it? How should I blend colors? And all that is very valid. But I want to tell you who I am. I am a spiritual artist, and I realized long ago that when I focus on the space before creation, on the spirit of who I am, on the thoughts of who I am, on the emotions of who I am, on how my body feels, that I create the best effect. We live in a cause and effect world, but so many of us spend our time only focusing on the effect.
Welcome to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. This is Chris Miller. I invite you to join me as I interview artists from a variety of disciplines. We'll share powerful stories and lessons learned while making their art.
Good day, spiritual artists. This is CJ Miller, the host of the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Do you ever wonder why sometimes you're able to go into the studio and everything just flows and you do a beautiful piece of work, or at least you do a beautiful start to a piece of work, and then other times you go in and you just hit walls? So, as part of my journey, I started watching myself. How do I work? And why is it sometimes I do a beautiful piece of work and other times I don't? And I realized that it really was about my state. And so, stay tuned, and I'm going to talk to you about how you can start focusing on the place you are, the state of your being when you walk into the studio, because that's the spiritual essence of who you are. That is the cause before the effect. And if you don't start focusing on that, you're always going to struggle as an artist. The first job is to get yourself into what I call alignment. So I'm going to share a chart with this podcast, and it's a rather complicated chart, and I'll have it appear up here. That said, if you're listening to this on a podcast player, I will have the chart available on my website under the resource section. You can download a copy of this chart because it's a great way to something to tape up into your art studio and start realizing, why is it that I can be so aligned with who I am and create beautiful work one day and not the next? So this chart, and I'm going to hold it in front of me so I can see, this chart is horizontal. It's on a horizontal axis. And on one side, on the far left side, is what I call the place where you're inactive, you're depressed, you're withdrawal, there's an emotional collapse. So on the very far left, I have a thing called depression, and then criticism, and then resistance. And in the middle of this chart, see right here, that is the place where you are aligned with spirit or creative intelligence. Let's talk about that a minute. What do I mean aligned with creative intelligence? We all know that spirit, creative intelligence, some might even call this God, is everywhere at all times present and always speaking to us. But we have to be in a certain place to receive that message. It's not that we don't get glimpses of the message, but we can make sure that we are as clear as possible to receive intuition and impulse and that connection to something greater than ourselves, what I call co-creating. And so this podcast is going to be an attempt to share with you how I outline this emotional journey that I take. An emotional journey, an emotional sense of mindfulness practice where I watch what I'm doing, where I am in myself. And so this graph is horizontal, and in the dead center, right when you are in total alignment, that is this essence of gratitude and love. It's when you practice presence. It's right when you're in the moment now. The rest of the graph is time oriented. This horizontal scale on the far left is when you're depressed. And oftentimes that comes when you're thinking about something in the past, some trauma that happened to you, something that is blocking your creativity. Now, if you look at this graph, you'll see on the far right side is red. It is a color-coded graph. On the left side, far left is brown, then purple, then blue, then green. Green is go. Green is right here and now. Green is where you are in the space of presence and you are receiving intuition so clear from creative intelligence, it just guides you through the process. You know what it's like, right? Um, when you're painting and you get lost and you think, "Well, how much time just went by?" And you lose all track of time because that's when you're right in the moment of presence. But if you push too hard, and I'm a king leader of that. I love to push too hard. If I'm pushing too hard, I go to the right side of this axis. I throw into expectation. Expectation seems like, oh, that's not such a bad thing, is it? Maybe so. When we expect a certain result, when we expect the painting to be a certain way, we start limiting its potentiality. We start constraining it to what we think it can be rather than being in green, where we let spirit or creative intelligence show us what it can be. Does that make sense? Expectation is when we start pushing it towards what we think it should be. And then if you go further, past a little past expansion, it's forcing. When you force something, have you ever worked on something and you're struggling with it and you're trying to make it work? You're forcing it. Maybe it's not working because it shouldn't be there. Or maybe you should move to another part of your painting and put your focus on it. And then if you get further, even further is anger. And I'm going to share this. I've shared it before in my podcast. Before I started becoming more mindful and self-aware as a painter and monitoring my state of a spiritual artist, I would get into anger. And I would actually, one time I actually ripped a hole through a canvas because I got so frustrated that I hit it with anger. That's not where you want to be. Anger is when you start shutting down. There's anger, hatred, denial of what's going on. So when you see this chart, you'll see that there's descriptions attached to each one of these color codes. There's an emotional state that I associate with those color codes. And we don't have time in this podcast to go over them. But on the far left is when you're unmotivated, depressed even. And on your far right is when you're angry and forcing and trying to make something on the physical plane happen. I am a spiritual artist. And so I want you to be in the state of presence, the state of spirit. And that is a timeless space. That's where you're just in the moment, where you're listening to your impulses. You're looking at the painting, you're listening. So you're aligning yourself. You're intending what you want. I intend to do a piece of, and that's not specific. When I say intend, I don't want you to intend that it has to look an exact way. Just I'm intending to do a good representation of this. And then listen. When you are in the moment, when you're in the now, that is when you're listening. You're practicing listening to intuition, that impulse. And that impulse could be just you reach toward a certain color. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been painting and suddenly you just grab a color and you just feel I have to have a color, or you start digging through all your paints because there's one color that you really know will hit the mark? That's your intuition speaking, and it's driving you through the creative process. So when I wrote my book several years ago, I was asked by my mentor, Virginia Cobb, to watch how I work. And up until that time, I simply sat down and started throwing paint down. I felt like it was always different, but it wasn't. And when I started watching how I worked, when I stood back and became the watcher, I realized that there were certain patterns to my behavior that were more conducive to creativity. I'm going to say that again. There were certain patterns to my behavior that were more conducive to creativity. When I was in green, when I was in gratitude, love, non-judgmental, non-critical, non-expecting, just being in the moment, not thinking about problems in my life. I know that sounds weird, but you know what? I started noticing that when I was painting, I started watching my thoughts. And if I started thinking about problems in my life, like why I'm mad at someone, I noticed that the painting started going wrong. It started getting dark. It started going somewhere where I didn't want it to go. I'm holding this space, this gap. I call it the gap. You're in the gap of possibility. And my challenge, I realized, was aligning with that gap, staying in that gap, watching myself, and listening to creative intelligence as it guided me to what to do. I know everybody wants to know how to physically do something. I have so many people come up and say, I don't know how to paint. And they're always asking me, what brushes should I use? And what kind of canvas or board or paper? How should I approach it? How should I blend colors? And all that is very valid. But I want to tell you who I am. I am a spiritual artist, and I realized long ago that when I focus on the space before creation, on the spirit of who I am, on the thoughts of who I am, on the emotions of who I am, on how my body feels, that I create the best effect. We live in a cause and effect world, but so many of us spend our time only focusing on the effect. So when they're sitting in front, I've taught classes and I'll see students sitting there and they'll focus on, I'm trying to make this color work. I'm trying to make this color work. What they should be focusing on is I'm trying to get in the space of the present moment, allowing it, just being in the space of joy. If I'm not in joy, if I'm trying to get this color to work, it won't go the right way. First, you align your presence. Then you apply your technical skills. And I'll tell you this much, your technical skills will continue to grow. You will always be adding new things. There is no end to new materials out there, new brushes, new boards. That's great. But if you don't align who you are, if you don't use this chart right here to start focusing on where am I consciously? Where is my consciousness right now before I paint? Then you will struggle. That is the first lesson. That is the first lesson of a spiritual artist. When I first wrote my book, I wanted the title to be, I actually played with this, The State of a Spiritual Artist, because I wanted to focus on that. How are you monitoring your state? And of course, as I've started looking at this process, I started realizing it was much more than that because it goes much further. And I'm going to do a recording after this and talk to you about the vertical axes that we have when we speak and hear from creative intelligence. But right now, I want you to focus on this horizontal axis. Go print this out. Go to my website and print out this form. This is really critical because it shows you, it starts teaching you how all day long, and I will tell you this, I share this with my people that come to my retreat. None of us stay in green. Do you hear that? None of us. It's a practice. All day long, I go up and down this scale. I get up in the morning and I find out that I didn't buy coffee and I get angry. And then my partner comes into the room and tells me that we're having trouble with paying bills or something. And I go down into depression. And then I get in my car and someone lets me out. Someone lets me out of the traffic. They wave me ahead and I go into gratitude and I'm in green. And then I'm driving down the highway and someone comes up behind me and starts trying to cut in front of me. And then I get mad and I try to race back with them. Then I move into forcing and I go to the right side. We're going back and forth and back and forth. Here is it in a nutshell. Here's what I'm trying to tell you in a nutshell. Your job as a spiritual artist is to practice staying in that green space, in the middle, in the space of love and gratitude. That's it. When you go into the easel, when you go into the studio today, I want you to practice that. Don't focus so much on what you're doing. Hold it lightly. Let the paint flow. Get lost in the paint. Get lost in the moment. But make sure that you're not lost in your consciousness, that you're right there in joy, love, and that you're holding alignment. So that's what this is about. The horizontal axis is alignment. It's about focusing in time. I love this summation, so I'm going to read it to you. The horizontal axis represents our emotional, physical, and spiritual alignment within the dimension of humanness, of time. It reflects how we show up in the present moment, influenced by past experiences and future expectations. On the far left are states of inaction, depression, withdrawal, emotional collapse, often linked to regrets somewhere in the past. On the far right are our expectations, overexerting, forcing, striving, anticipating, often driven by anxiety or fear of lack, right? We all do that. We try so hard. We all want something done. And once again, we're not immune to this. Even I am not immune to this after all these years of study. Both ends pull us away from the center. You want to be centered, right? In the center, we find balance. This is the still point, the silence, the place of love, gratitude, and presence. Okay? Here, everything, the body and the emotions and the consciousness are all aligned. And that is where you hear creative intelligence. When you're in that place, you hear a higher power, God, spirit, directing you, sending you signs, signaling to you, do this, do that, do this. And that's when you get the most creative output ever. But the minute you jump into, oh my gosh, this is working out great. I can't wait to see. Expectation can force you from that. It happens all the time. I'll start painting and I'll be perfectly in line. I'll be green. And then something starts looking good. And I think, oh, this is really good. What if I mess it up? What if I mess it up? And I slide down into the brown side of the scale. And then I think, oh my gosh, I have to, and I hold that brush tighter and I try to make the line straighter or more clear. And then I move over into the right side. It's about practicing presence as a spiritual artist. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy my chart. And we will follow up and I will talk to you about how you clear the vertical axes later. So go in there, be creative, be a spiritual artist. I invite you to go buy my book. It is available on Amazon. It's called The Spiritual Artist. And I think this is going to be part of book 2. So enjoy this little preview of the next book. Talk to you soon.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.